for joining again for the Metaverse Summit roadshow. So for today's Metaverse Summit roadshow, we have a very big, great audience, great participant, because we've never had any researchers or academics in our show. So you will be the first one, Professor Touradj. How are you doing? I see that you are in the Swiss mountain, right?
Yes, there is great snow here. Hello, Yangzi. It's a pleasure to be here and discussing with you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. Could you maybe tell us what's your current occupation and what I've been doing maybe in the past year of 2021, and what's your plan of this amazing year, upcoming year of 2022?
Yes, with pleasure. Let me start with a brief introduction. I have a few hats. My main hat is that I'm a professor at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, or as we call it, École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, EPFL. My job there has been since 25 years when I got hired has been to work on innovations in multimedia technologies, and also at the same time, I take care of teaching of a few courses in the field of multimedia signal processing. And of course, I do research at different levels, fundamental level, all the way to practical levels. But that's my main hat. I have a couple of other hats also. I have been, throughout my life, always interested in real world and real applications and taking things to market. And because of that, I have been involved in creation of a number of startup companies. The latest one, since about a couple of years, is called RayShaper. And it's a company that is based in the Swiss mountains in Montana, and we work on AI-powered multimedia. We like to call it computational vision. And my third hat is that since 2014, so a few years now, I have been head of the JPEG Standardization Committee. This has given me a lot of exposure to both sides of things, technology, but also applications of technologies in form of standards.
Yeah, thank you, Touradj. And you're being a bit modest, but the first introduction people told me about you is, the father of JPEG, the creator of JPEG. So, of course, you know probably everything around JPEG and the recent revolution around the NFTs also, right? Could you tell us around the history, the kind of the evolution around all these years, and what's your point of view of the current NFT phenomenon?
Yes, so let's talk about standards. And if I understand the question correctly, you want me to actually start by giving you a little bit of historical perspectives of standards like JPEG and why do they exist? What is the incentive behind creation of such standards? Well, you know, every time there is a new technology that appears that can impact and create an ecosystem, in order to have this ecosystem in a heterogeneous and efficient way, you need conventions, you need standards, because you cannot rely on a single player who would monopolistically take over and control the entire ecosystem. In fact, in some countries, it is even forbidden to have monopolistic ecosystems. And standards are there exactly because of that, because you want to be able to define some rules and some specification so that any stakeholder, no matter where they are, from the creation all the way to the consumption of the content and anything in between and anything around it, to be able to bring in their added value in a way that it will ensure interoperability. And a very, very good illustrative example of that is what JPEG did and about 30 years ago, and JPEG is famous about. When the world of photography moved away from chemical photography into digital photography, the minimum was that you needed to have a format so that anybody who would create a picture or generate a picture can use that format. And then anybody else who would like to offer, for instance, software to change or edit these pictures, or to just simply visualize these pictures, they had to agree to use the same format. And this is what JPEG brought in. JPEG brought in a standard that said how a digital picture should be represented. And thanks to this small but very, very important element, a lot of stakeholders, so camera manufacturers, software developers, and all sorts of device manufacturers, be it TV, be it laptop manufacturer, mobile phone, etc., they were able to exchange digital pictures in a perfectly transparent way. But this was the past. And of course, all what really JPEG did about 30 years ago was to offer similar type of experience to users in digital world that people had already in analog world or chemical photography world. But now we are moving really towards a very, very different relationship with media and with content. The first thing that has happened, and today we are really in the middle of it, is that the content is become richer and richer. What does it mean? When 30 years ago, people had cameras that were pictures, they were of very, very small size. In fact, typical cameras about 30 years ago were VGA. VGA is less than 1 megapixel. Today, when you take a picture with your smartphone, not even a high-end smartphone, you have at least 10 megapixel. That's almost 20 times better resolution as what existed 30 years ago. And when you have such a huge amount of information, 20 times more, you should be clearly smarter. You should be able to compact the information in a much better way. And you should be able to do that in a way that is more in line with the type of things that people do today with this kind of content. Same is true for the dynamic range of images. Images that were created about 20, 30 years ago did not enjoy the same type of richness in color and shades that we have today. Today, people are creating through sensors that exist now, even on mobile phones, not only high resolution pictures, but pictures that have higher dynamic range. They have better contrast. They can show in dark nights much better the details, and in also bright days they can really render all sorts of shades and tones of the color that can be produced and seen by the humans. And this is what JPEG has been doing through new standards like JPEG 2000, like JPEG XL. JPEG today is offering new ways of still having what was possible in the past, but in a better way. So it's a richer experience that did not exist necessarily in the past, and these standards are enabling this. And if we look at the future, we see that, well, the pictures do not necessarily need to be flat, right? People talk about metaverse, people talk about virtual, augmented, and mixed reality, and the objects in this kind of environment do not need to be flat the same way when they are projected on a screen or printed on a piece of paper. In that case, this kind of three-dimensional objects that could be seen as an extended, again, representation of flat pictures become important. And that's what also JPEG Standardization Committee is doing. So JPEG is actually working on new, even richer representation of visual information that go beyond flat images or flat images that move. The video that is flat. They give you adaptive information, and they give you also the ability to interact with this kind of three-dimensional information almost the same way we evolve in our physical world and interact with 3D physical objects. And this is where things are going. Now, I wouldn't be complete if I do not also tell you that in addition to making the information in terms of visual richer and better, JPEG committee has been looking at a few other things that are also very important that have to be dealt with. One of them is the issue of security and protection of rights and protection of privacy. When 30 years ago, the first digital cameras started to appear, there weren't that many, and the quality of these pictures were not high enough, and therefore people were not really bothered about that. But as time went on, the quality of these pictures became extremely high, and those who were creating this kind of content, this kind of pictures, they wanted to sell them, or they wanted at least to have a way to claim their ownership, and that's where also JPEG has been playing in the past, and has provided standards like JPSec that secures the content. This secures the content not only in the sense that you can claim the ownership of the content, but also you can protect the privacy of the people, for instance, that are maybe in these pictures, and give conditional access to them. And also you can, in general, authenticate and make sure that a digital picture that you've received has not been tampered with since the moment it was captured, or since the moment it was sent to you. Somebody didn't intercept it and change it. So issues around security, for instance, are also, and safety in general with the content, its integrity, its ownership, and its conditional access are the type of things that JPEG committee is doing nowadays also, in addition to taking care of richer modalities to represent visual information.
Yeah, thank you, Professor, for all the details walking around all the historical revolution around JPEG. And I've been following all the updates around the JPEG committee, right? So very happy to see all the technical improvement, although I'm not an expert. So when I was listening to what you said, what I hear kind of from my background and profile, I heard interoperability, which is a huge issue when we are talking about a metaverse. So you mentioned the word standard, right? So what do you think about the standard or the future standard in terms of metaverse? And what's your suggestions kind of to the professionals in different industries who are co-constructing the future metaverse? How can they work together around this?
Yeah. So again, a metaverse is a very, very complex ecosystem. So it is almost impossible to think that one standardization or one standard can cover all the aspects of it. Like anything else, if you look, for instance, the world of mobile phones today and mobile communication, or the world of social media, there are a number of standards, each coming from different group of actors and players that have become dominant, that are important in order to create this interoperability. Now, in the case of metaverse, things are even more complex, but I try to give you a few structure it a little bit. So there are different ways you can define standards. One is the standards for algorithms, so more abstract things like what should be the format of an object, or what should be the algorithm used to protect its ownership, versus which kind of hardware or which kind of interfaces, even hardware interfaces, have to be employed in order to communicate, for instance, information between a smart glass and another smart glass, or the metaverse, which is on the cloud probably. So there will be a necessity for having a number of I would say communication and interface standards. You need both very physical standards that are needed in order to, for instance, know what is the best type of plug and what should be really the physical characteristics in terms of bandwidth and which kind of even shape, etc., of these interfaces that should exist. But then you will have a number of more, I would say, abstract standards, and JPEG is trying to at least deal with the way the content should be represented. But you also need which kind of standards should be used in order to stream, for instance, this content. That probably will be done by MPEG. You need standards about how the content should be stored on and in which format, not necessarily the same format, on the cloud, and understand what are the needs of each of these cases, and based on these needs, what is the best solutions for it. In fact, this is exactly how things are done today, right? If you take the world of broadcasting, camera manufacturers, they have their own standards, and it's not the formats that are used and not the same interfaces that are used in order to do the broadcasting. So in the studio, there are very different standards for professionals than there are for consumers. And then the end user devices also, they are not using the same standards. Each of them have different needs. Typically in a studio environment, you are always looking at maximizing as much of the quality and the content, no matter what the cost will be. So your first priority is the quality and the richness of information. And the second quality, the second requirement becomes, okay, now what's the cheapest way I can get this? But you're not going to compromise the quality. On the end user devices is exactly the opposite. End user devices cannot be more expensive than some limit. You won't pay for more than $1,000 or €1,000 or 1,000 Swiss franc for mobile phone. If you tell, oh, the mobile phone is 10,000 Swiss franc, you almost don't get anybody buying it. So the problem there becomes the opposite. The problem is, okay, what is the best quality and the richest experience I can offer when I have only a budget of 1,000? So for 1,000, what's the best I can offer? And then you for this target. Yeah, so there will be, to summarize, all sorts of standards that will be needed, and it won't be a big standard that will cover the entire metaverse. There will be, depending on which application you are targeting. If it is a metaverse application that is more professional, probably you will have different standards than if it is more consumer. And then whether it is high end or low end, you probably have different standards. And as I said, this is actually today the case for many, many ecosystems that we use in streaming, in social media, in broadcasting, in surveillance, in self-driving cars, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for giving the tips and some insights around the metaverse standards, let's say plural standards in the future. So I was walking through like all of your publications kind of, and I saw a great title for maybe another topic, but it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. So it instantly reminds me of the NFT craziness of last year. Did you imagine like a JPEG picture can worth that amount of crazy money? I don't even know the latest number in 2022 January, but it's quite high, and it's a profile photo and everything. So did you imagine this? And what do you think of the current NFT development around the JPEG and the future maybe of this combination?
Yeah, so that's very interesting point you are bringing. So, well, let's first talk about NFT. So NFTs, as you know very well, is not only about JPEG images or even video. You could NFT for anything. You could have an NFT for a physical house even, or a physical painting. You could even, and people are talking about having NFTs for even patent inventions. So NFT is really a new way in the digital world to define ownership. Of course, the ownership, when it becomes a content, and if especially the content is digital, it doesn't need to be digital, but if the content is digital, then standards like JPEG come into the picture. JPEG has, since day one, since 30 years, it has been offering standards, has been always looking at trends like NFT, like mobile communication, like the internet and the World Wide Web, and has been always asking itself the following question: what can JPEG do in order to facilitate the deployment of businesses, content, and products and solutions in the most efficient way, thanks to these technology trends? That's what we did when the World Wide Web was created. The World Wide Web, when it was created, images in the beginning of the World Wide Web were represented not in a progressive way. And in fact, the first, you are too young for that, but if there are older people in the audience, they would probably remember that when in the beginning of the 90s, 94, 95, people used to get on the internet from home through modems that were connected to phone lines. The bandwidth was very, very low. It was between 20-something kilobit per second to about 50 something kilobit per second, very, very low. And people wanted to see also pictures. They had to wait sometimes up to a minute to see just one picture. And the picture was building line by line, slowly and slowly and slowly, until you could see the entire picture. JPEG saw that and said, oh, that's not the right way to do it. And said, okay, is there a way we could see the picture, maybe not at the same quality, faster? And it came up with the progressive JPEG. Progressive JPEG was the response to the fact that the internet, at least in those days, was very slow. And therefore, people wanted to see much, much quicker and have an idea about what is the content. And so you would, and that is something that we see today, and is very normal for everybody, that when you look at the picture, if your bandwidth is low, you see first a blurry version of it, and then a higher and higher and higher resolution with higher details until the entire picture is downloaded. So you don't have the same experience, which is waiting to see what's going on. Here, you immediately see what's going on. You could even stop it. If you are not interested in the picture, go to the next one. You don't need to necessarily wait for the entire picture to be sent to you. So this kind of trends repeated itself many, many times. In mobile, I can give you another example. When mobile communication started and a lot of packets of information were being lost, you had cases where images were not arriving in an intact way to the mobile device. So part of the information was being lost because of various reasons, and you had to have ways to somehow deal with this lost information, still to have the picture decoded and displayed for you, but despite the fact that part of the information is missing. And this is where JPEG came up with all sorts of tools for error resiliency and error reconstruction and so forth. And the same is now happening with NFT. So NFT is a new trend that people believe is going to be a very, very fundamental and even revolutionary, sometimes some people say, way of defining the future of information and communication technologies. And JPEG is asking itself today the same question. So NFT is happening. What can we do? And there are a number of very interesting questions that have been raised by the JPEG committee. And JPEG committee is today busy in looking at these problems and coming up with standards. I'll be happy to mention some of them to you if you are interested.
Yes, I've been following kind of JPEG community's publication, the slides, presentation around the new standard. I think recently there's also a series of workshops, maybe around the ownership and the privacy, right? So, and you also mentioned that this side of the topic, the privacy, the ownership, how to fight against the fake media. So could you share us kind of like what is your current engagement or advancement or works around it, and how can actually the whole industry tackle this problem?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's NFT, because this is probably where we want to focus now, given the trends that are happening. So NFTs, non-fungible tokens, they have a number of technological components in them, right? One of them is the blockchain. Obviously, blockchain, there are experts in it and standards in it that are happening in ISO, ITU, and elsewhere. So JPEG doesn't have anything to say really from that point of view. However, not all, as I said, but a large number of NFTs they point to, and they are certificate of digital items. These digital items are either pictures, so we see a lot of pictures, and animated pictures, so movies basically, short movies, but also increasingly we see three-dimensional objects. So one question is, how can we, and what is the best and most secure way of connecting and of binding the NFT, which resides on a blockchain, to the digital item that it is claiming the ownership of? This binding is very important, right? Because if I have a certificate that says I own a picture and I do not have a very, very secure and reliable way of connecting you to that picture, somebody can go and take this picture, replace it by another picture, and then I'm the owner of a picture I did not want to be owner of. So this binding is a very, very important issue, and the technologies that will provide the binding between the digital asset, as they call it, it doesn't need to be a picture, it could be a video, it could be a 3D object for the metaverse. This binding is very, very important to define in a standard and a very, very clear way. The second problem that JPEG has identified, because we see this happening even today, is that today a lot of cases have been reported where content has been minted as an NFT, even sold, but the one who minted this content and sold the content was not actually the owner of that content. So how can you be sure that whoever is minting a content, they are actually the true owners, and they can and they have the right to do that? This is again another very, very tough but solvable problem, for which we need standards. And JPEG is actually looking into coming up with a standard so that if somebody goes to OpenSea and wants to mint a picture that belongs to somebody else, or even a 3D object that belongs to somebody else, OpenSea knows that actually they are not the right owners of it. So there will be a reliable and secure way for always knowing whether somebody is truly the right holder of the content or not. And of course, what makes it even more difficult, but still possible, is that you have to do that without identifying people, because you want to protect the privacy and identity of people through that. So this has to be done by not identifying necessarily who the person is, but only having the proof. So finding a way to prove that the content is owned or is possible to mint by somebody. The person has the right to do that, but not necessarily through knowing who the person is, because maybe the person doesn't want to be known. So these are, I would say, two of the biggest challenges that JPEG committee is currently looking at in the framework of non-fungible tokens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely work in progress topics. I'm not an expert, but would this be necessary actually for kind of like entrepreneurs, projects, and startups? For example, companies like OpenSea to work actually hand in hand with researchers such as yourself to tackle this kind of issue, or would it be kind of like researchers doing kind of this effort and publish it as open source research for the industry to adopt?
Yeah, so open source and standards are actually very close to each other. So many open source projects are actually there in order to complement or actually define standards. So when you take the open source, you basically are adopting whatever standard that open source has done. So standardization is very important. I don't think that anybody can get away in any ecosystem, including NFT, by not agreeing on a standard. My hope is that it's not today the case, unfortunately, but my hope today is that we will gradually, but quickly, end up in a situation where there will be a few dominant standards. The same way in the world of photography, there are 2-3 dominant standards for formats. JPEG is the most widely used, but not the only one. There is PNG and GIF that are also used. So if you can get with 2 or 3, or again, not a very large number of standards for NFT, it would be great. Unfortunately, today, almost everything is happening, and it's not natural. So there are those who want to go quickly, so they do some quick and dirty work, and they are the first comers. That's always is good when you are the first or among the first. People adopt your solutions, but how long these solutions can last? So we see that many of these quick and dirty solutions and people who have minted NFT through these quick and dirty solutions, they are actually now realizing after a while that they are doing it, that there is a lot of fraud is happening. A lot of these NFTs are being stolen. Some NFTs are being minted and sold that were not supposed to be sold, and because the owners and those who created the content behind these NFTs were not even aware of that. So these problems are happening because some people tried to do it quick and dirty. I'm not blaming them. That's how the world of the information communication technology started. The first days of the World Wide Web, there were a lot of frauds also. There were a lot of problems. People were paying goods using their credit cards, and their credit cards were being stolen and used for some other purposes. But little by little, people learn from it. And today, we are in a much, much better situation, and we have learned from the mistakes. So it's normal that, and it's even desirable, I would say, that we allow actually a melting pot. We allow those who go quickly and not really thinking, and those who would say, no, actually, I'm going to think more and spend a little bit more time and come for a more secure system. And the reality is that the best solution probably somewhere is in between, because until you don't really try something in the real world, you don't know what are its weaknesses and strengths, and then try to resolve its weaknesses. But of course, if you deploy something too quickly and there is only weaknesses or some major weaknesses, then the entire concept of NFT will be put in question. It's not really the NFT, if you ask me, that is put in question nowadays from those who have concerned about security, is the specific implementation of the idea of NFT by some that has some flaws. But that's how the World Wide Web was also developed. The internet and the mobile and social networks and all these things, people tried. There were some issues. They tried to resolve them, and little by little, things became better. And that will probably happen to NFT also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Touradj. It's a great comparison also to mention kind of the early stage of internet, and today we see all those the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the fast, and the slow ones. If anybody knows, it would be you, right? Who's been innovating actually JPEG format, among other things, during the past years. So maybe we can finish with a bold guess. So what would you imagine in Metaverse, maybe in 5 to 10 years, or even more than that, like 20 years?
Okay, well, in 20 years, I would say it's just impossible to know. The world is moving so fast, and so many different trends, they combine, that it would be impossible to think of the world in 20 years. The same way, if we go to year 2000 and we tell people that there will be this craze with cryptocurrencies, and there will be this craze with even, that we are going to most of our time. Of course, it's because of pandemic, but it's not going to go away. Now, most of the interaction with people now is going through video streaming and telephone conferencing and things like that. 20 years ago, if somebody was saying, yeah, you are going to spend most of your time on Zoom, probably would say, no, this will never happen. But actually, this is what we are doing now, regardless what the reason is. So 20 years for me is too much in future. I cannot really say anything. 10 years is probably more reasonable. 5 years for sure. I do not have any doubt in my mind that in 5 years from now, we will have Metaverse playing as central role in our lives as today the World Wide Web is playing. So a lot of things are going to migrate to Metaverse. In fact, a lot of things we have around us in terms of physical entities, including our mobile phones, do not need to exist physically. My laptop, my tablet, none of these, my TV, my computer monitor, they do not need to exist physically. Now, probably a few other things you could debate, but I still, for the sake of debating, bring it up. Probably a few things also do not need to exist physically. A lot of decoration, for instance, chandelier or the paintings on the wall of my room, they do not really necessarily need to exist in atoms and physically. They could be just overlays that has been overlaid on my field of view through my smart glasses. So this is what I see from between 5 to 10 years from now. Probably the world is going to go through the same type of changes the world went through thanks to mobile phones, thanks to the World Wide Web and internet, and thanks to social media. And I think it's not really far-fetching, because technology is almost mature, and we are getting to a situation where probably our mobile phones are going to be replaced by smart glasses, and maybe a little bit later on by smart contact lenses. And a lot of things that today exist physically won't exist physically anymore. And then that's why I think that the ownership, because as humans, we really like to own things, and economy and commerce does not exist without the concept of ownership. Therefore, NFT will play a very, very central role in this world that is happening. Beyond 10 years from now, I think there are other trends that are happening in artificial intelligence, in quantum computing, in genomics, in interfaces between brain and machines that are going to make it almost impossible to guess what in 20 years the world will look like.
Yes, that's a great future, actually. It will be Disneyland every day for me, living in the metaverse. I'll be counting every day from now. And also maybe looking forward to you in person, in real life, in Paris in July 2022, so that we can all discuss in real life, in person, about the topic of metaverse. So yeah.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much for the sharing, the insights, and looking forward to all the future innovations in terms of JPEG, and hopefully the whole industry is gonna adopt kind of the standard to protect the ownership and privacy and decentralization of the metaverse assets and identity.
Yes, thank you very much, Yingzi, for this very rich and exciting talk. It was a pleasure to talk to you.